Hey everybody, Bob Chick along with David Bay. We're back with The Last Rep, and look who's joining us, David, our good old friend. By old, we mean old. It's Peter McGough.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to be back with you too. Let's have a great show.
Well, we've got plenty of topics. Certainly, David just got out of a 14-hour sleeping funk on his way back from Australia. So good to have you back in the States, David, but what a trip, huh?
Yeah, no, it was a good time. It's a little bit of a flight, about 15 hours there, 14 on the way back. Don't ask me how that is. Tailwind, headwind on the way there, but it's not too bad. You know, if you time your sleep right and get adjusted as quickly as possible, it's it's doable. But the trip itself was fantastic. You know, I was there 2 years ago, and it was a first class event then, and now with it being an Arnold Classic, it's the bee's knees down there, man. I'm telling you, Tony's got it all set up.
The bee's knees, Peter. You can't beat that, really.
The bee's knees.
No, all the dog's bollocks, as we say in England.
It must be an England thing there, yeah. Well, whatever it is, it was a great show from Tony Doherty, of course, and we expect nothing less. Congratulations to Tony and the entire production staff over there at the Arnold. But I don't want to spend a lot of time in the show results. They're not a lot different than what we saw obviously in Columbus. The sub-stories actually seem to be more interesting, Peter. And, of course, Kai Green ends up the winner here. I don't think that really surprised anybody. But more the interesting story to me is, despite being asked 100 times and getting all kinds of answers, we can't quite get Kai Green to commit to whether he'll be on the Olympia stage.
Yeah, it's unusual for a top guy to sort of be hesitant at this stage. You know, some of the new guys, when they turn pro, like Phil, Heath and Justin lately, have bypassed their first chance at the Olympia. But when you're a veteran at the Olympia, it just seems surprising that he hasn't got it. He's not focused on it yet to the extent that he can commit. And at this point, you know, it's not that important. But of course, we had last year where it went right to the 11th hour. So we might circumvent that now because apparently they have to have the contracts back by May the 13th. So we should know then or not whether Guy will be doing it. He should do it. You know, he's part of the show. Everybody wants to see him. He's you know, off the charts and popularity-wise. He's got one of the freakiest physiques out there, if not the freakiest of all. So it'd be great to see him up there and back in the Olympia.
Well, David, let me ask you, I don't think there's any question that Kai belongs on the Olympia stage, and certainly the fans want to see that matchup once again, but is there any good reason on this earth, if you're in the world of professional bodybuilding, to not do the Olympia?
No, not really. You know, I think from his standpoint, you know, I don't know whether it's a business thing or a peaking thing. You know, some of the guys that they do the Olympia, they like to take the full year off. I think we have Roden and Wolf taking a full year off again. Dennis, or rather Phil Heath, you know, takes a full year off. So maybe Kai's just planning on doing the flip side of that. Skip the Olympia, do the Arnold, you know, do the Arnold Australia, do the Arnold Brazil, and, you know, do a couple of the earlier shows in the year, and then take off the remainder of the year and just prep for the Arnold again. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. And from the fan standpoint, you know, the fans want to see the best, and Kai and Phil are the best, and that's people love the rivalries. And to not have Kai on an Olympia stage, but knowing that he's running around winning Arnold Classics, is just going to leave the fans always wondering, you know, whether this would have been Kai's year. Of course, if Phil gets back on stage and is off a little bit, then that becomes the discussion again. Could Kai have won it this year? But right now it's just a big question mark. I just saw that Olympia LLC actually has a Kai countdown on their website now.
Yeah.
It's an actual running clock of how much time he has to sign the contract. So the Olympia LLC, Robin Chang, making it very clear that Kai is welcome to do the Olympia. They want him to do the Olympia. It's just a matter of, you know, putting his signature on the dotted line.
Well, listen, there's no gray area when it involves whether he can or can't, whether there's other things at stake here. Last year, whether there were issues that had other things attached to him. That is not the case. It's very clear. The Olympia has made it very clear, like you say, a running countdown, actually, that, look, man, we want you in, love to have you, you're qualified, here's the time frame. But, Peter, I don't want to overlook the elephant in the room here. What is the bigger picture? Why would he not want to do why would you go in Arnold Classics, winning them all? Certainly he's the number one contender. no matter how you dice it. Why would you not go in the Olympia?
Well, I mean, Kai is a very, he's a different bodybuilder, isn't he? He's got a unique
You think?
physique. He's got a unique mindset. Maybe he just, has got himself into a way of thinking that maybe he felt let down in some way last year. We still don't know the details of what was going on. And maybe he's just, picking his ball up and he's not going to kick it. Maybe it's as simple as that. But if he wants to be proved as the best bodybuilder in the world, he's got to win the Olympia. And many people think he is. Many people think he should have beaten Phil maybe a couple of years ago, or was it 2013? But it's no being the uncrowned Mr. Olympia if you're not in the Olympia contest. It doesn't make any sense. And with all due respect to the Arnold Classic, we all remember the Olympia champions, but reel off the Arnold Classic champions from the beginning. There's very few people can do it. It's not, the Olympia is the contest where you leave your mark in history.
Well, and that was literally going to be my next question. David, when you're talking about bodybuilding history, Peter couldn't be any more correct than he is. People go by Olympias. There's only been 13 winners in over 50 years now. So it's a very exclusive, a very elite club. And trying to get in there is not easy, certainly. But listen, you can have 10 Arnold championships. They don't equal one Olympia. I remember asking Branch Warren, he's got a few Arnold Classic titles under his belt. I said, would you trade those all in for one Olympia victory? Without hesitation, he said, absolutely.
Oh, of course. It's like winning an NFL MVP or an offensive player of the year or a defensive player of the year. That's all fine and dandy, but everybody wants a Super Bowl ring. And I think that's what it comes down to is obviously the Arnold Classic, an incredibly prestigious title to have. And I don't know that I could quite list off every year, but I think I could go back and get pretty close. But with the Olympias, there's nothing that compares to it. Everybody wants to be Mr. Olympia, and there's no reason where if Kai is really, really on the money, which he has yet to be for the last couple of years at the Olympia. If he's really on the money and nails it both Friday and Saturday, and Phil comes in a little bit off, there's no reason why Kai can't win. And just that alone, it's one thing for a guy to skip the Olympia who might think he's a 5th or 6th place contender or something like that. But when you're a real contender to win that title, skipping it just doesn't make sense to me.
No, it sure don't, Peter. But another point I wanted to address. Now, the Arnold years ago was one show, as we all know, Columbus, Ohio, every year, second only to the Olympia, and obviously a very elite show. The winner of the Arnold always establishing themselves generally as the front runner, contender to the Olympia. Now that there is more Arnolds, and we've got one on every continent or close to it, not sure Antarctica's ever going to have one anytime soon, but does that water it down, though, Peter? Does it mean as much to win an Arnold Brazil or an Arnold China when that comes as it did a few years back when there was only one?
There is a point that it could dilute it, but I think the Columbus event is so massive, in terms of the expo and the people that come in, that it'll always be the pinnacle of the Arnold circuit. But you have to think even this last Arnold in Columbus, what did we have? 9 competitors, and only one of them was from the top 7 of the Olympia. That was right. Branch Warren. Of course, Kai didn't do the Olympia. He would have been in there. So the last couple of years, it hasn't attracted the top guys. That usually just about everybody from the Olympia, from the top 4 or 5, 6, go in apart from the champion. So there's that aspect of why it might be sort of, losing. This last couple of years, it does seem to be a couple of weaker lineups than we've seen before.
Well, Peter, me and David have been dying to get you back on the show because, as you know, the posing round, your favorite round of all time, added back into the mix at the Arnold Classic. My question to you, it came down to Kai and Cedric, just as we predicted it would. Apples and oranges, grapefruits and bananas, pick the fruit. Bottom line is this, Peter. Did the posing round make any difference in the ultimate scoring and the ultimate victor?
No, not really. I think if you go right down the places, whoever was like 5th in the prejudging was 5th in the posing round, 6th. And, so they were still, by the look of it, judging the physiques rather than the posing. And I've never said the best dancer should win the posing round. I just say it's another area or arena for the bodybuilder to show his physique in a different way, and does add some excitement. When somebody like Kai came on, I mean, he brings the house down.
Sure.
I mean, the great thing about Kai is, I mean, obviously he trains hard. He has these marathon training sessions, but he must put hours and hours into getting that posing routine together, and that's all to his credit. I mean, he is a showman. He's the ultimate showman. That's why we need him in the Olympia.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, listen, the Melvin Anthonys are gone. The Durham Charleses are gone, but actually reemerged now, and we'll get into that in a second, making his debut in the Pro Classic physique. So we saw a different-looking Durham Charles, David. Actually, we'll segue to that right now because...
well, I did want to talk a little bit about the Arnold Australia because there was a big flip-flop with Lenardowitz and Compton, and that's something I did want to talk about a little bit. Is that the way Kai looked Saturday night at finals in Columbus, his much improved look. I think that's pretty much how Kai looked both Friday and Saturday. So Kai really brought it. Cedric, I think, might have slipped a little bit, but for me, the one thing I did want to talk about the Arnold Australia was the huge improvement that Justin Compton made. I mean, he came out both Friday and Saturday night and looked a million times better. And oddly enough, when he got on stage on Saturday, it was kind of like the case of when we saw Josh in Columbus 2 weeks ago. When Justin got on stage on Saturday, you could literally see him getting better and better and better as he posed. I mean, Steve Weinberger puts those guys through a couple more rounds of posing, and I think Justin's pushing Cedric. And even, I mean, it was literally to the last minute when they were standing on stage waiting for their awards. It was like you could almost see Justin getting tighter. So, Justin's been a big talk the last couple of years. And I think, last year in Australia, he was better than he was in Columbus. Still not this version. So I still don't think he was as good as he was when he won in Orlando 2 years ago overall, but he's bigger. And he was really able to pull things together. His posing still needs a little bit of polishing, but kudos to Justin Compton. I mean, just a huge improvement from 2 weeks ago. And again, I think a much-needed confidence booster for a younger bodybuilder.
Well, Peter, you remember years ago, probably to me the most famous case of a guy improving throughout and getting rewarded. We were at the Olympia, and we watched Gustavo Bedell literally go from probably 8th or 9th place all the way up to 3rd place. But when he came out, I mean, he looked good. But like David's saying with Compton, every round he just got sharper and sharper and sharper.
Yeah, I think we saw that in Columbus, didn't they? I mean, the more he posed in the evening, the better he got. So maybe the lesson for him is to spend the 15 minutes backstage posing, getting all that water out of him. And yeah, Gustavo was, that's when he made that big breakthrough. And Gustavo, when he's on his own, he looks good. But when he stands next to somebody, he looks better. That was the thing in comparison. You think, wow, he's got that. And yeah, at the beginning of that contest, he was drifting into 8th or 9th, got a 3rd call out. And then as they moved him up a little, he got higher and higher, and then he finished 3rd. Amazing.
Yeah, it certainly was something to watch. But, listen, the judges get all kinds of stuff all throughout the year. They're always taking all the heat, that they can possibly muster on the placings and all that. But I want to give them actually a shout out in terms of, especially Steve Weinberger. Like David said, these guys get the pose. I mean, and he puts them through the ringer, but you're never going to hear a guy complaining about getting compared too much when it comes to the Olympia, not just the Olympia. Looks like we lost David on our feed. But Peter, I'll put this one to you. I am all for these guys getting worked to death because honestly, as a competitor, I want to be compared. I want a good fair shake, and some guys do get better, and some guys do fade as they're going.
Yeah, and I think it's good the way that they'll bring the top 3 or 4 back on, and Steve really does work them and then swaps them around. It really does build up an atmosphere of competition, that these guys are going at it because obviously the sweat's lashing off them. Some of them are breathing heavily. So it's like the end of the race, that they've given it all. And I think it's a good development the last couple of years that Steve's brought in, even if it's not close. Work them. Have that crescendo as the final call out, where they're really going at it and they have to give everything to get the places.
All right, Dave, we lost you there for a minute, but we got you back. But we were talking about, obviously, the guys having an opportunity with many, many rounds of comparison. And I'm all for it. Peter is certainly for it. But we've seen guys move up and move down throughout the course of a competition. Kudos for the judges.
Yeah, and that's a trend, and I caught Peter talking about that a little bit before I got cut out, is that Steve Weinberger is, especially Steve, is really putting guys through the ringer at the last pretty good handful of shows. And I think that's good because it gives the judges an opportunity to really take a look at these guys, but just for the fans love it. There's always this, whoever gets put in the middle is the winner, and then the guys on the right and left are, your second and third. And what Steve will do for you guys who haven't seen the shows is Steve will switch everybody around. He'll put one person in the middle. He'll put the next person in the middle. He'll move them all around. So, generally he finishes with, I think, who he likes for the win in the middle. But he's moving these guys around a lot, giving them different angles, different comparisons, and like I said, it's great for the judging. Everybody gets a fair look, and it's great for the fans. Creates some drama and some much needed excitement during these prejudging and finals rounds.
Well, the other thing it does is it takes a lot of the question marks out of the judging for the fans that are watching and that are following along. Nothing is more frustrating than having a guy take whatever 4th and 5th or 5th and 6th that never stood next to each other. It's like, well, how did you determine that this guy wasn't better than the other guy if he was never directly compared? I mean, so I have no issues with more comparisons. I'm sure, all the competitors would agree on that.
No, and it seems like they've been doing that a lot lately. Sean Andros was the head judge in Poland. He did that quite a bit. We had a discussion on that. But he had like a 4-guy first call out, and then he brought out like 5 guys, and then like the top 3. And in Australia, the first call out was actually 5 guys. It was Kai, Justin, Josh, Cedric, and Evan. So it was a 5-guy first call out. So we know Justin and Cedric and Kai were your top 3 spots, but Evan and Josh got a look against those top 3 guys. Now, conversely, later on, we saw Evan and Josh up against the next group of guys. So there was definitely a fair shake for everybody in that lineup. The guys who were a little bit lower got to stand next to the guys who were a little bit higher. And we've discussed that before. When you get a first call out, the guys, right around 4th or 5th place, everybody wants to see them against the guys at the top of the next call out. And it looks like as far as, all signs point to, like, that's the way the judging is going with the early indications we have in 2016.
All right. Well, Peter, you mentioned some of the great posers earlier, Melvin Anthony certainly being one of them, and Kai Green, of course, with his unique abilities on stage. But we'd be remiss, Peter, if we didn't mention one of the all-time greats, of course, Darren Charles, now retired from bodybuilding in the context that we know him, but reinvented himself, showing up on a stage last week at John Lindsay's show in the brand new men's classic physique. Your thoughts, Peter?
Yeah. Obviously, there's dimensions that they have to make, their weight and height and what have you. Looked to me like Darren had to, he wasn't one of the bigger guys around as a pro, but it looked like he had to streamline himself to get in there. And funnily enough, 10 years ago, we had the first New York Pro by Steve Weinberger, and Darren won it. And he came in, you remember he put on about 10 or 12 pounds there? Everybody said, wow, he's really filled out, and he won that show. And I think he came in about 230. I don't know what he was the other day, but Danny Hester was a great winner, but I just felt Darren, I'm not sure, how this weight, height thing is going to measure. I think it's a great advance to classic physique. It'll have teething problems like all new classes do, but it'll settle itself down, I'm sure. But yeah, it's great to see Darren back. And what is he, like 45, 46?
At least, yeah. I mean, he's coming up on 50, I believe, but he looked great. Again, reinvented, gives him a little bit of new life. David, obviously, we all saw the pictures. A very good top 3, and I don't want to take anything away from Danny Hester, who I've known for many years. And Danny walks around looking like that, like literally. He's always in shape.
Yeah.
He's always, missing a few meals away from, getting on stage. And Stan McQuay, who I thought could have actually taken that show, the only exception being he's literally inked up from top to bottom when he turns around. His entire back is ink, which is cool and all, for him, but it did kind of take away from his physique.
It's definitely distracting. I have a friend who competed at junior national a few years ago, and his full upper body is completely everything. His chest, I shouldn't say his full upper body. He's got a couple stomach tattoos, but his chest, his back, double sleeves on his arms. And he actually had the cover-up makeup put on. Now, the cover-up makeup for tattoos is very tricky because if you get it right, it can look very good. And if you get it wrong, it looks awful. It looks like somebody covered you in clay. But, it actually worked for him. He had it done very well, and it very much enhanced his detail. I had seen him a few weeks prior at a local show and just kind of shook my head because for as good a shape he was in, you weren't able to see all that detail. And I think that's what Stan's running into. There's no way around it. When you have that many tattoos, you're losing detail. So for Stan, like I said, you have to have somebody who's really good with that cover-up stuff. They have to do a very good job at blending it with the rest of your tan. But that might be something he wants to look into. Danny looked fantastic. I've been following Danny since he was on American Muscle on ESPN back in the 90s. Sure. Took him a little while to earn his pro card. And then Darum, I liked Darum as a bigger bodybuilder. We were talking about that on the forums the other day. I started the thread, what do you think? I think to be honest with you, I think his physique looked more classical as a bigger bodybuilder. He shaved down a little bit. He still looks good, but I preferred him bigger. That said, with Darum, I don't know if you guys saw what he posted on his social media. He's doing like this men's classic physique tour where basically he more or less said he's going to every classic physique show. It was like a Darum Charles classic physique tour, and I think it literally listed off every single one. So I think you're going to see him in Miami next weekend, the first weekend in April, and he's going to be on stage quite a bit. So I think he'll get a win and get back to the Olympia stage sooner or later. But if it doesn't happen with a win, I think he's pretty much a lock on points if he's going to do that many shows.
Well, listen, hats off to Darum because this gives him new life. It's definitely something he aspires to. But, Peter, I got to go back to something now. A few shows ago, me and David actually talked about classic physique. And one of the things that we zeroed in on was, and I can't remember if I said it or you said it, David, but was that I don't think you're going to see that some of these guys that have, quote, classic physiques aren't going to look that classic when they have to make the weight for their height. And I think Darum fits right into that. Now, I think Darum had a classic physique the way he was, but clearly, he had to drop some muscle to get into this class. Is this something that you're seeing that may have to be changed in the future, Peter, with the height-weight combo?
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be a difficult decision to make. I mean, what are we saying? That the open class now, anything goes, just get as freaky as possible, as big as possible, as thick. Don't worry too much about the midsection or whatever. You're right. I mean, David's absolutely right about Darren looked more like a classic physique bodybuilder when he was in the open. Right. And he's had to streamline his physique and looked a bit stringy. So I think those weight limits need to be looked at. But, it's difficult. There's got to be a demarcation line between the open and what the classic guys are. And, some of these men's physique guys have got classic physiques already. I see some of them getting into it. So we don't want these merging of classics happening. But you're going to have I don't know. It's like you say, Darum looked great in the open, didn't look so good in the classic.
Well, I've got an answer, boys. Luckily, as you know, I'm always thinking. All right,
here we go.
Here we go, Peter. Here's what we do, right? Open, classic physique. Easy.
This sounds like a judging nightmare.
Listen, hey, no weight restriction, no height restriction. Well, can't be restricted on height, but you know what I mean. So there's no box in there. It's open to anybody who wants to do the classic physique. But like Darum Charles could have gone in there at 220-something pounds and looked every bit of the classic physique we're looking for. My biggest issue with the class actually isn't that. And it's not that, and I agree with you, Peter, it's going to have some growing pains. Like every class, it's going to have to kind of seek its own. The biggest critique I have right now, from what I've seen, is the trunks are horrible. The square cut trunks that they're wearing is not good, and it does not enhance the physique.
Danny Hester didn't wear the kind of trunks that were required. If you saw the pictures of Danny Hester, right, he did not have the 11-inch shorts. Danny had posing trunks that looked like they were out of the 50s or 60s. And I think, and look, this division is going to evolve, and the IFBB and the NPC, they know that as far as the weight classes, they're going to take a look at things as it gets going and say, do we need to make changes? Do we need to make height? The height thing is getting a little awkward because you get guys that are 6'5" next to guys who are 5'6". Right. There's like Peter said, there's going to be some growing pains, but we're already seeing some guys who are kind of pushing the limits as far as the posing trunks for the smaller trunks. And I agree 100%. I'm not crazy about the spandex shorts. I really like, whether it be bodybuilding or classic physique, I really like the throwback trunks, so like the 50s and 60s style. I think they look really cool, and Danny wore those, and obviously it was okay by the judges. So I think moving forward, at least at a professional level, you're going to see some guys wearing a little bit shorter shorts, and I think it'll help showcase the sweep in their quads a lot more. I think that's what you're really losing, is if you wear shorts that go halfway down your quad and you have a nice sweep coming off your hip, I think you lose that in shorts. And I think you don't need the bodybuilder type posing trunks that show off half your butt, but I think having maybe some adjustments as far as the posing trunk requirements is something we'll probably see happening.
Peter, your thoughts? Are the men's physique competitors coming up short?
Yeah, well, as far as Danny Heston's concerned, if he's got trunks from the 50s and 60s, I do hope he washed them. But to go back to your point about making it open, that brings in a really subjective view of whether the physique looks classic or not. And so you could have Cedric McMillan entering that class.
You might. Right.
Cheery up, everybody.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think that's where your judging comes into place. Have some criteria that they adhere to. See, I don't know if a height and a weight restriction puts them in that category of, okay, now they're a classic. And I think Durham is the poster child for this, where I agree with both of you guys. This guy's physique before, when he was in the open bodybuilding, looked more classic than his classic physique because he has to fit himself into a box now. So I wouldn't mind seeing him.
I think Durham's a bit of an extreme example because he's got to be around 5'9", 5'10", I would imagine. I think he's a little bit taller.
Maybe 5'9". I'll give him that.
Yeah, so he's got to if he's 5'9", I think he's got to squeeze under 200 pounds or 200, 205. So you're talking drastic.
He dropped 20 pounds of muscle.
A drastic reduction in muscularity, where guys like Danny Hester and Stan McQuay might have had to lose a little bit of muscle. So I don't know that Durham's necessarily the best example. I think you'll see most of the guys who are already a little bit smaller, or 212 guys, that are transferring over into classic. I really don't think you're going to see a lot of guys who are big names in the men's open go down to classic. I think it'll be mostly 212 competitors.
Well, Peter, I don't want to beat this one to death, but when we talk about classic physique, what we're really talking about is bodybuilding. Back in the day, the physiques weren't as big as they are today. They weren't as conditioned as they are today. The midsections were definitely a bit smaller as the guys were, but they were bodybuilders. Make no mistake about it.
Yeah. I mean, you look back, Lee Haney, Lee Labrada, Ben Fatto, all those Zane. There was a look. There was the wide shoulders, the narrow waist, the flaring thighs. To me, that's what bodybuilding is all about. What it should still be all about. But there is an audience for the freaky mass monsters, and I in some ways, I don't want to be insulting anybody here, but to build a really great classic physique takes a genetic gift, really, that you've got the right bone structure, the right limb lengths and everything. Of course, the hard work comes up and on top of it. And, when it comes down to condition, although a lot of guys aren't making it, to be blunt, if you're willing to suffer enough, you can always get condition, can't you, Bob?
Sure.
But you can't build classic physique. So I would love to see a return to that kind of physique. I mean, I would go as far as to say, if somebody on the cover like a Lee Labrada or somebody is going to be, more people are going to be attracted to that physique than some of the physique we're seeing on the pro stage. So I don't think we're going to go back to it. I don't think the classic physique is going to replace the men's open, but it's an interesting development that, I'd love to see how it develops now.
Well, I'll leave you guys with this. One of the most classic physiques of all time, I think we would all agree, was probably Bob Paris. Now, that's a guy who, unless I'm wrong, Peter, you can correct me on the spot, I don't think he ever won a pro show. He was in a few Olympias, but I don't recall him actually ever being in the winner's circle, which is kind of a miracle when you really think about it. But at 6 foot plus, Bob Paris wouldn't even have been close to making weight for the classic physique division. So I think when you look at that, it's a little bit strange in that, that physique, much like Durham, if he had to make that weight, and I don't even know what that is, it's probably like 205 or something, which was, Bob Paris, as Peter will attest, David, was a lot bigger in person. He was not a small guy.
He was, sorry, I was just trying.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, he was over 6 foot. He was about 6 foot, maybe 6'1", and perfect proportions. I mean, when he first came out, he looked like a future Mr. Olympia, and then, he didn't get into the condition that was required at that time. But he like you say, that's a classic physique. And what was he, 240 pounds or something?
Yeah, probably. I mean, he would have had to have dropped 30 pounds from contest weight to have gotten into that class. I mean, I'll be curious to see where this goes over the next year or two.
Yeah, I think it, it's a combination of a couple things. One, I agree with you guys both that classic to me comes down to structure, not a height and a weight. But if you are going to try to put together a division to try to have those physiques, there's got to be some kind of guidelines. Like I said, these are.
All right. So anyway, David, bottom line, Bob Paris being one of the best examples of this, but Bob Paris at his height and weight wouldn't have been anywhere close to classic physique.
Yeah, no, like we discussed, classic to me, and I think to a lot of the old school bodybuilding fans, the oldest of school bodybuilding fans like Peter. No, it comes down to structure more than it comes down to a height and a weight thing. But if you have to have guidelines and you are moving forward with a new division, that they have to start somewhere. Like to me, you could have a Sean Roden, you could have a Cedric McMillan, you could have a couple of the big open guys go into classic physique and fit right in if you're talking structure. Even some of the 212 guys. But like I said, they have to start somewhere, and I think you'll see adjustments made as far as the height and the weight, maybe as far as what poses are called, as far as trunks and all that. And we got to remember we're only a couple months into a new division, so there'll be some bumps and bruises along the way. But for as hesitant as I was when I first saw a couple of the NPC shows, to have names like Danny Hester, Stan McQuay, and Durham Charles at your first pro show, that definitely says that the division's headed in the right direction. Points to all signs being good.
Well, mark my words, boys. Remember, you heard it here first. Open men's physique coming soon to an IFBB near you, if I got anything to do with it. Anyways, speaking of classic physiques, Peter, we celebrate the life of Joe Weider and his legacy, of course. 3 years ago to this date, we lost Joe to that big gym in the sky. You worked hand in hand with Joe, obviously, for many years, as everybody knows by now. But bring me back to that first phone call that you got from Joe Weider telling you, pack up your stuff and come here to sunny California.
Well, I was trying to make this short. We started a tabloid newspaper in England, myself and Anne, Pumping Press, which really took off because it used to come out a week after the event. The guys at the 91 Mr. Olympia went on the tour the next week, and they couldn't believe they were reading a full report. It wasn't a flash report. It was like 20 pages, all the photographs. So it really took off, and we were lucky in a way that the WBF came up, and so we had somebody to aim at. But yeah, Joe and Ben, I'd met Joe briefly in '88, and that was the only conversation I ever had with him. Ben I used to see regularly, but then in 1991, when Pumping Press took off, we had this 2 little offices above an electrician's shop next to a chip shop in England, not the best part of town. Only the 2 of us working away. The phone rings. Joe Weider's on the phone, answers. I said, no, come on, it's a joke. Anyway, I picked the phone up, and Joe came on, and almost the first thing he said, do you want to come and work for me? And, like a split second, you thought, nah, Joe Weider, I don't want to work for Joe Weider. And that's when it all started, and we went across, and the first thing he said to me on the first day in the office was, I brought you here for your sarcasm. And, it was nice to feel wanted in that way, But I always had a great relationship with Joe. And funnily enough, I don't want to name drop here. I spoke to Betty Weedy yesterday. And she was saying how Joe felt about me. And I tend to think this is true, and let's divorce myself from this. Joe got on with people who were direct and honest and weren't working an angle, and that's what she said to me. You were always honest with him, straightforward. You disagree with him, but you never tried to take advantage of your position. And I've seen that so many times when people make a connection to Joe or Arnold as well. They try and move the relationship on, and it doesn't work out. You've got to be low maintenance. Don't ask. I never asked those guys for anything, Arnold or Joe, but Joe was really a visionary. He had a very creative mind. When he liked to talk to you one-on-one. You never saw him call big meetings. He was always him and you. You've been in the office.
Sure.
There's two chairs. You're facing him. There's no desk between you. Your knees are almost touching, and that's when he's at his best, when he's one-on-one with people. And things have changed since he left. And let's be honest, he died 3 years ago, but the company was sold over 10 years ago. And, with Joe leaving, internet, attrition, the whole industry, publishing industry changed. But the boom times, the great times, were those years in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the early 2000s, where Joe was the driving force.
Peter, take me back to the last Olympia that we had the good fortune of having Joe come out, and you could still see that look in his eye. He was so excited, but it was such a grand stage, at the Orleans Arena, 10,000 people there filling the seats. The last time you talked to Joe at the Olympia, I mean, did the atmosphere and all that still excite him? Did it give him great joy to see kind of what it's become?
Well, the story there was on the Thursday night before the Olympia, we went to Joe and Betty's place in Vegas to have dinner. We normally did that before the Olympia. And sadly, Joe was far from his best. I don't think he really knew who I was, because obviously, he was in the stages of the illness. And there was a doubt whether he'd go to the next day's Olympia or the Saturday night finals. And he went to the finals, but he sat in the green room and he was non-communicative. And then he suddenly said to Betty, I want to see the guys. So she took him backstage. He saw the guys and he just came alive. That was his world. That was his world. And Betty said, that's the way it's always been. I mean, it was like a resurrection from the guy who was really out of it and non-communicative, as I say, and then he was taking photographs and he was messing around with the girls, the bikini girls and everything. And that was really, I always looked at that as the last hurrah, because that was like 2011. He was too ill to come to 2012, and of course by 2013 he'd gone. So that was a last great memory of him being in the place he wanted to be the most, in the middle of the bodybuilders.
Well, David, I can tell you firsthand from my recollection, first time I was able to meet Joe at his office, it was after I won the USA. He invited me up to the offices, and it's too bad you never got a chance to go up to the Weider offices, but it was quite special, and Peter worked there. But still, I mean, the building was exactly what you thought it would be. Pillars, big giant, pictures of all the champs in there from Larry Scott right on. I mean,
It's
big,
larger than life.
oh yeah, I mean, it was exactly what you would think. But I'll never forget walking into that room, and just like Peter says, there's a big giant long table, and there's statues all over the place, and stacks of magazines and paperwork and things. And there was Joe Weider, and he congratulated me on my victory and all that. It was surreal standing there. I'm talking to Joe Weider. I mean, this guy's been, everything. He's bodybuilding. And the minute he found out I was from Rochester, New York, Peter will love this one, of course, Danny Padilla. Oh, you're from I can't do a good Joe Weider imitation, but he said, oh, you're from Rochester. I used to tell Danny it's not even on the map. And But yeah, the minute I said Rochester, Pete Krumkowski, Danny Padilla, he had a whole list of guys. He said, "Man, what do they put in the water over there?" I said, "I don't know." But what a great experience to meet Joe Weider, face to face. I mean, I can only imagine, that you would have been in Peter's place years ago. I mean, imagine getting a phone call from Joe Weider asking you to come to the States and work for him.
I mean, my experience with muscular development has been, surreal, and it still is at times. So, I can only imagine getting that phone call, and I would probably have the same reaction as Peter, like, all right, who is this for real? Like cut with the prank. But yeah, unfortunately, I started with muscular development after Joe had passed, and didn't have the opportunity to meet him. But obviously through people like Peter and yourself and other people in the industry, I've heard some great stories, and nobody has anything but wonderful things to say about Joe. And I guess the term that keeps coming up when they talk about Joe Weider is just the word vision. He had a vision for the industry, and that's what took bodybuilding and helped make it what it is today.
Peter, you obviously got a chance to spend a lot of time with Joe talking bodybuilding, and I know that's really what he loved, was talking bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Give me, from your perspective, did Joe get involved, like in terms of, did he agree with the placings all the time? Was he interested in who was winning and all that kind of stuff? I know he didn't get involved in the politics end of things, the business end, so to say, with that Ben did. But did Joe have his own viewpoints on the judging and placings and all that?
Obviously there's a myth built up that Joe picked the Mr. Olympia winners and, it was a done deal. It was never like that. He would talk about the guys going into the contest and say, how do you think they're going to do? But, it's an interesting question because I never heard him say that was the wrong result. That was the wrong whatever, Joe looks upon bodybuilding, like David said, as a visionary. And to him, it was an art form. To me, I'm a little bit different. I like the big, a physique that looks like it can do something as well. But he was more into, the classical look. And when guys used to come in and pose, he used to get them to pose. A pool of sweat would be left on the floor. But he was more than anything encouraging to every guy that came in. Like you came in, every guy would come in and he would always encourage them to take the shirts off and then say, maybe you need to improve this or do that. But he never got deeply involved in discussions about who should have won and who shouldn't have won. I think, I was quite close to him. So I think if he had any reservations on that, he would have voiced them, even though they wouldn't have been for publication. Absolutely. I mean, he always had a thing that Gunter should do better. And that's why he got the invite to a couple of Olympias. Right. And of course, then he got that invite to like the 2002, and everybody's saying, here we go again. And then Gunter gets fifth, finishes third in the evening, had a standing ovation, which we don't see. So maybe Joe saw something that I never saw. He used to ask me about Gunter's physique, and I used to say, well, this is the weakness, this is the strength. But I never thought Gunter would be that good, to be honest. But Joe did.
Well, Joe certainly was a visionary. I think everybody's on the same page with that. Is there anybody that stands out, Peter, that he really thought was going to be, other than Gunter? Is there somebody in there, Lou Ferrigno, or again, any of the guys that maybe came along during the years that he kind of had pegged as a future Olympian champion that never quite made it there?
No, I don't recall one. I mean, the strange thing as I look back, you have to realise that I only got to know Joe from 91 onwards. So, when he saw pictures of Dorian in 93, after the first 92 win, he was basically saying, this guy's unbeatable. Those sock photographs, And he said, because Louis was doing the contesting, I'm going to send these to Louis. He'll freak out, So he had that sort of sense of devilment about him. The first time I took Phil Heath in to see him, he was very complimentary to Phil, and afterwards he said, "You've got a star there." But you didn't. Obviously, Phil with that muscle composition. This was just after he won the USA.
Sure.
Ron, he was a great fan of Ronnie. Once he'd won the show, I can't remember him ever before in '98 saying, "Watch out for Ronnie, watch out for Ronnie." But once he'd won it, they became pretty close friends, pretty close indeed. So, and like on the covers and things that we used to do, he never used to say, put so-and-so on the cover and promote him or promote that. I had arguments with him on covers. That's the only thing I ever had to show him was the covers. And he would say, "I don't like that cover. I think you're wrong, but you're the editor of the magazine. I'll let it go." One of the biggest blokes we ever had was over a Lee Priest cover, which Lee Priest always causes trouble, even when he's not directly involved. And he was looking for another shot of Lee Priest, and he found one, and he showed it to him. I said, "No, but he's curling, and all you can see is his forearm. You can't see his bicep." And I'll always remember it. I said, "That's not a good shot." He said, "God damn, I've been picking shots for 50 fucking years." So that, put it up, yeah, did go a bit far there, But we went with the original Lee Priest cover. So he did give you a head, if you had the confidence and the ability. And I always made sure the cover. I used to see other editors go in there and he'd say, "I don't like that cover," and they'd say, "I'll go do it again." I had to get all the ducks in a row before I went to see him at the cover. Some days he could be in a bad mood and he wouldn't like whatever you brought in. And I'd say, "Well, I'll come back tomorrow with the same cover." And he'd say, "That's great." And off we went.
Well, Peter, certainly always appreciate catching up with you, especially on the old stories and especially with Joe Weider. David, you can't say enough about Joe Weider, the father of bodybuilding, the guy who put it on the map, a guy from 40 something, was involved in making the sport evolve to what we see today, the house that Joe built, all that stuff. But closing thoughts on Joe Weider's legacy.
I think all you got to do is look at the background of my kitchen here.
Yeah.
Right there. This is literally, everything with bodybuilding stems with Joe. And I think, it almost sounds like a cliche statement, but none of us would be here on this show, covering the sport, doing what we do, if it wasn't for him. And so for his, wherever I send my thank you off to, it's a big one.
Well, Joe Weider's legacy, Peter, of course, will never die. And the Olympia, of course, going on this year once again in Las Vegas, Nevada. The house that Joe built will be alive and well with Phil Heath defending the title and looking, of course, for number 6. Whether we see Kai Green on stage or another future star emerges this year, we'll be along for the ride covering it all. That's going to wrap things up for this edition of TLR. I'd like to thank Peter McGough and welcome you, Peter, back for your return where you should be. And, of course, my partner in crime, David Bay. We'll catch both of you guys later. And next week, folks, we'll be back with another edition of The Last Rep.